With 3 weeks to go, Martin, you might just give us your recollections of the few weeks, and particularly the last week.
Well, I think it's probably more the last. Well, I remember we got a message on the grapevine from the Ulster Unionist Party is they wanted the real negotiation to be concentrated in as short a time as possible so that they wouldn't be exposed to, Paisley jumping up and down, is that, to limit their exposure to about a week. Now, I remember we had a meeting, and in fact there was a dinner in Downing Street. Now, folks had sort of put together, a rather over-lengthy list. I remember thinking that at the time, but I kept my mouth shut. Over-lengthy list of sort of all possible areas of North-South cooperation. Now, partly on the grounds, well, this is what the SDLP wanted. But I mean, it was very clear to me. I mean, to be frank, we had a meeting after Christmas. This is '97. This is sort of 3 or 4, your steering group of officials with the in a private unionist house, and Donaldson was there among others, and I remember saying, now, I might have a different attitude to negotiation. I mean, I think a lot of people think, well, if you put up the absolute maximum and then it'll be reduced. I tend to be more, but I think I said to Donaldson, this is my recollection, is, well, we'll need at least absolute minimum 6 north-south bodies and 6 areas for implementation. Now, in the end of the day, we actually got. I mean, if you think of the energy thing, which wasn't listed in anything, we got a bit more. But anyway, it eventually got boiled, and you had to, in very difficult personal circumstances with your mother's death. You had to, reduce the scale, because you remember John Taylor saying we wouldn't touch that with a 40-foot pole. But, I mean, I suppose, it gave them, in inverted commas, a win. I'm not sure that the underlying realities of the situation were much altered one way or the other. Exactly. But I sometimes reflect on this. Now, a far more important international treaty was the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. 25 years after, Europe in the middle of an even worse world war. So I think, we can take some you can take some satisfaction in that, for all the sort of flaws and faults and all the rest of it that we keep discussing, and after all, matters that had been solved militarily, all the pressure went into the politics. So therefore the politics were bound to become more difficult rather than less difficult in some ways. But and the fact that it is still mentioned so often, not just by American presidents but by the EU in the Brexit, I mean, it shows that something really important was achieved. And I suppose one of the things that those in charge now have to ensure is that there isn't a backwards movement on it, and that the backwards move could happen in 2 ways. I mean, one, God forbid, a sort of any recurrence of violence, and that would principally happen, I think, if people that try to push out the boat too far, too fast. And then the other gain that must be protected, and which so far we've done, and hopefully it will come to a positive conclusion, is the complete freedom of movement that we've had. Now that's partly due to the internal market, the combination of the internal market and the peace process, and I mean that is a huge gain. Now I think, as you or someone else has pointed out, there's even north of the border, in the border areas, the population is at least 60% nationalist. Exactly. So it's unlikely that, and somebody once joked that, well, you wouldn't get any recruits north of the border to sort of border posts for health and safety reasons.
I wanted to touch quickly, Martin, just get your views on a few of the main participants, or their parties or individuals, whichever way. Just your take on, I mean, John Hume and the Good Friday Agreement, but Seamus Mallon, I think, who was kind of taking a lot of the key role at that time. Yeah. And I think they played an enormous contribution.
Well, I think, in the case of John Hume, it really goes back to the late 60s, and even in the government papers of 69, 70, his sort of conceptual vision, and he was somebody, say, in the late 70s that wanted to shift things up to the level of the two governments, as opposed to just letting the parties not sort it out between themselves. And then, you see, I would give him credit. Now, it would have been very easy for John Hume, having got a significant achievement with the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which was primarily for the benefit of the SDLP, simply to sit back on his laurels. But that wasn't a bit of his attitude. His attitude was, well, now we must go forward. It was less about sort of achieving devolution, but more about achieving an end to violence. And I mean, he played his part on that. And you see, whereas, say, in the early 80s, I mean, he was prepared to shift. He'd been rather sort of taken with, well, the Europe of the future won't be a future of nation states. It'll be of the regions, the Richard Carney stuff. Now, I mean, obviously he shifted his position when he was in dialogue with Gerry Adams and so on. And I mean, that took some courage. Now, he got a fearful media battering, as you know, from the autumn of '93. By people who thought yes, of course, what he was doing in a way was risky and dangerous, but I mean the prize at the end of it was huge. But I'm not sure that his health ever fully recovered from that period. Now, shame. I mean, John Hume was. His wife Pat used to talk about sort of sending him into orbit every Monday morning, sort of thing. It was London and Strasbourg, and sometimes America as well. Mallon was the person who stayed on the ground and who, if you like, did his best to keep the party together, and. He went in with David Trimble. I mean, who wouldn't have been the easiest partner to work with, but he did it nonetheless. And of course, he had a wife who was becoming increasingly sick. So I think, I mean, we owe him a lot for getting the thing off the ground.